Hello and welcome to Just Liberty, where justice and liberty meet. I'm Bettina Krause, editor of Liberty Magazine. I'm here with my co-host and friend, Alan Reinach, who is president of the Church State Council. And together we are trying to take back religious liberty from the political extremes. And Alan, talking about political extremes, that is what we are focusing on today in the context of Pakistan. And we're going to be talking with two people who have brought to life a story that we in the religious liberty advocacy community know well. It's a story of Shahbaz Bhatti, who was a Pakistan politician, and they have a really creative way of bringing that story to life. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Alan, why don't you go ahead and get this interview going?
Our interview today is about a champion of religious liberty who literally paid with his life for his beliefs. And we have two guests today. Knox Thames is a human rights lawyer and advocate who has spent his professional career more than 20 years defending religious freedom globally. He served under 3 U.S. administrations and more. You'll learn more about that as we talk with him. Matt Yocum is a retired U.S. Air Force colonel and also very, very prominent in the American military. Not going to go through all of the accomplishments and details of the bio. I don't want to put you to sleep, but two wonderful guests, and we're really looking forward to this interview. Welcome, gentlemen.
It's great to be here.
So the obvious place to start is Knox and Matt. Tell us a story of Shahbaz Bhatti. Tell us the background to it for people who may not be familiar with it.
Shahbaz Bhatti was a prominent Pakistani Christian human rights advocate who had been a campaigner for religious freedom in his country for his fellow Christians, which are a very small minority, only about 2 or 3% of the overall population. But also he spoke up for others who were suffering for their beliefs, be they Hindus, Shia Muslims, Sikhs, or even other members of the majority Muslim community who were being victimized by extremists. He rose to prominence over years of campaigning and was actually made a government minister, given the portfolio of the Minister of Minority Affairs under President Zardari. At that time, the case of Asia Bibi arose, the woman who was sentenced to death for blasphemy, for allegedly saying blasphemous things while working on a farm one day in southern Punjab province. And he campaigned for her release. And as this issue became of greater profile internationally, the threats also started to increase. And tragically, on March 2nd in 2011, he was assassinated by the Pakistani Taliban as he was leaving his mother's home in Islamabad. Shahbaz was a friend of mine. I had known him for several years, and his death was shocking for me, but it was particularly shocking for the Pakistani Christian community because it sent a powerful message that they were vulnerable, that terrorists could even strike a government minister. But I learned so much for him, and that led me to wanting to find a way to make others aware of his life, his sacrifice, and take inspiration from it, both as a human rights advocate, but also as a Christian who did his work out of a faithfulness to Jesus Christ. And so we were able to, thanks to the Templeton Religion Trust, find the funding to create a graphic novel, a comic book about him, to inspire the next generation and hopefully create opportunities for them to learn more about global persecution, but also what we can do as Americans, as Christians, as people of goodwill to confront the violence that's impacting so many.
So, Matt, Shahbaz Bhatti is a genuine martyr of our generation, isn't he? How did you get involved with this project? You didn't know him personally, did you?
I did not, no. But I had been, parallel to my military career, I had been a lifelong writer first starting in prose, but eventually shifting into the comic book world, and had an opportunity to write for Marvel Comics. I've written Avengers and Wolverine and a few other titles for Marvel. So that began to ramp up as my career in the military was winding down. And I had already made connections with a different comic book company, an independent comic book company that had made connections with Knox. And so when Knox had received the fund, the Templeton Religious Trust Fund, to tell this story, they talked to him about the possibility of doing this as a graphic novel. And so I already had a connection with them and had experience in the art form. And then B, in my military background, I had been to Pakistan a number of times as a regional specialist, both for the Middle East and for Central and South Asia. And so that was something unique. It was kind of that combination of knowing the art form and knowing the country.
Yeah, I was thinking that, just based on your bio, that you had probably spent quite a bit of time in some of those hot spots in the Middle East and were familiar with kind of the culture and the challenges that Shahbaz would have been facing.
That's right. That's exactly right. Obviously, so much of my career, things were, fairly active in Afghanistan, but we had a long relationship with Pakistan as well, and I've had a number of times I've been able to visit there.
So Knox, when you sat down, first of all, with Matt, how did you both decide to approach the creative aspect of this project? I mean, you could have gone any direction. So what direction did you choose, and how did you come to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Matt and I both agreed that we wanted this story to be about Shahbaz, his courage, his faithfulness, and not about the people who were against him or ultimately killed him. It's a story of one man who is willing to risk it all to carry his small candle, a small flame of hope, into some very dark places and pay the ultimate price for it. And we also agreed that we wanted this to have, as Matt has said in other contexts, this isn't his tombstone, but rather this is a launching pad. That while it does end with his death, it does remind us that we have a responsibility to carry on his work, that we have a responsibility of people who enjoy religious freedom. We have a responsibility as Christians to pick up his candle that's fallen to the ground and continue to carry it forward. It's a relay race. The race isn't over. And so it was great working with Matt and just learning about how you make a comic book. I've written in a lot of other formats, had not been involved in a comic book process. So it was fascinating to see how Matt envisioned just the story being laid out in the different little boxes and the comment bubbles. And then working with the artist, Jordan Holt, who's a professor at Lee University in Tennessee, who's an incredible artist, how they collaborated to just bring this story to life in such a powerful, powerful way. And I'm incredibly proud of it. The family is just so moved that these two men would put so much time and effort into telling the story of their lost brother, their lost uncle. And when we did the launch event in Toronto and in London, the Pakistani Christian community is also ecstatic that people decided to tell their story, and tell the story of their hero. But really, at the end of the book, it's a question: what are we going to do now, knowing about what he gave, and how are we going to respond to meet the challenge today?
Now, I heard you say that the focus of the book is on his story and his courage, etc. But earlier, Knox, you were saying that it was really his advocacy against the blasphemy laws and the abuse of those blasphemy laws, and in particular, the death sentence against Asia Bibi that really spelled his end. Talk to us about what that was all about, the blasphemy laws and their abuse, and how that led to and Asia's story is a fantastic story in its own right.
Absolutely. Yeah, Pakistan has the dubious distinction of leading the world in the number of people currently detained for the so-called crime of blasphemy by a factor of 3 or 4. Their law is the worst blasphemy law in the world. It victimizes Christians and other religious minorities, but it's also used against Muslims in the majority community because there are no limitations to its application. There are no safeguards, no procedural safeguards. Anybody can make the claim, and then the person who's been accused is literally on trial for their life, and their life is over for the next 5 to 8 years as they go through the slow and Byzantine Pakistani justice system. So it's a cancer that's really eating away at the soul of the country. And this was something Shahbaz was speaking out about because he saw how it was being abused by just hateful people to advance their political and religious agenda in a way that was against the best interests of the country. So while he was a very brave Christian, he's also a very brave Pakistani patriot. Like he wanted the best for his country, for all Pakistanis, that no one would need to live in fear of how they pray or what they believe. And the forces of darkness took note. And as he was making progress towards Asia's release and seeing people starting to question the way the law was structured, the death threats started piling up. And tragically, they followed through. And Pakistan is not any better and perhaps a little bit worse than it was 15 years ago. But that doesn't mean that we give up. It means that we think about the lessons we can take for how he conducted himself and continue to help the millions of Christians and others who are suffering every day in that country.
You know, Matt, I'm curious because this is such a heavy topic. This is a dark topic. And so you have this material. How do you then go about making that engaging? How do you, what literary on-ramp did you choose to kind of tell this story in a way that just wasn't completely dark?
Right. I think the most important thing to that was making Shahbaz not just an historical figure with a series of events that happen, either to him or through him or what have you, but making him alive and making him a person. The first question we had to determine right away was, who's the narrator of this story? Is it Shahbaz looking back on his life? Is it his brother Peter, who I got to spend some time with? Is it his niece and nephew, Peter's kids? Or is it just a third person, that omniscient narrator that just recounts certain facts as you get to watch some of this play out? We ultimately chose his niece and nephew, David and Natasha. And so sitting with them, who this is their uncle, that's where Shahbaz came to life to me. He's the fun one, the uncle that would go on, adventures with them or go hiking or things like that. And so we still had to obviously tell some of the bigger moments that happened, but then there's some very personal moments. In an event that Knox and I just recently were at, where we got to spend time again with the two of them after the book came out. They said it really revived those memories for them as well. They got to relive those memories. And so that was a testament to, I think we breathed life into him through the pages of this story.
Matt, as I'm listening to you, I'm struck that your experience writing for Marvel Comics really comes in here because, I haven't been a consumer of comic books in many decades. But when Marvel was in its infancy and I was a kid, my recollection is that by contrast with the competition, the characters were much more nuanced and developed. And it wasn't just the sort of action plot. The characters were fully formed. And I hear you, saying what you really wanted to do was fully form this character of Shahbaz, this person, and not just make it about the facts and the action.
You're exactly right. Getting a chance to talk to Knox, who Shahbaz was his friend, and Peter, who was his brother, and David and Natasha, he was their uncle. All of this helped paint the picture. And to your point, in Marvel, there's a central theme for all the characters. With Spider-Man, we know it's with great power must also come great responsibility. And then you dance around the wheel of that central theme and retell that theme over and over. But it's Peter Parker's story, right? It's the unlovable loser who gained this power, but then learned the harsh lesson of the responsibility that goes with it. That's what I had to figure out. What is Shahbaz's theme that all the different elements that made up his life are really are connecting to this theme. And so we talked a lot about what is the theme of Shahbaz's life. As Knox said, not as a tombstone, not to plant this graphic novel in the ground and say, here lies Shahbaz. He was born on this date and died on this date, and here's everything in between. But a theme that transcends beyond that. And to your point, that's what resonates with Marvel, is telling themes that resonate with people that go beyond just one moment in time.
Well, this is not intended as a plug for Marvel Comics.
No, no, not at all. But it's the same. It's telling a story, a compelling story, in this case, a true story. And of course, we also have the story of the gospel. And that's what we're ultimately trying to share with all people, is that there is a true story. In this case, even Shahbaz's life, his sacrifice. There's a greater sacrifice, right, that his is a testament to. And that's what's so amazing about this story, is to remind people there are people who have paid the ultimate price for their faith in Christ.
So when I first looked at the this graphic novel, I mean, I was pulled into the story. I mean, the artwork, the storyline, the narrative. What's the response, Knox, are you getting from folk who have read it so far? And also tell us when this book launched, and anything about the rollout.
So it's available now on the website of Ignatius Press. And hope your viewers will check it out there. And it'll soon be on Amazon as well, which I know will be a much easier way for most people to purchase it. The response has been incredibly positive. My first focus was, did the family like it? Did the family feel honored? And like I said, they are just deeply moved by how Matt and Jordan told the story of their fallen loved one. And then seeing the Pakistani Christian community in Toronto and in London just have a hero from their community, a community that's often overlooked, rarely remembered, be memorialized so beautifully, has been incredibly gratifying. And, people have asked, what do I think Shahbaz would think about the comic book? Well, I think first he'd be a little bit embarrassed, because he was a pretty humble guy and was building relationships with people of power, not to advance himself, but to advance the cause of religious freedom, the cause of Pakistani Christians and other minorities. But I think he'd be honored with how we told his story. It's a story of faithfulness to Jesus Christ. And there are 3 sections in the book, and each begin with a story of Christ from the Gospels, to kind of that ties in with the different phases of Shahbaz's life as a young man growing up in a rural village, as a young advocate and campaigner, and then sort of the last months of his life when he was a government minister. So trying to bring that thread of faith, which he talked about so much as his motivation, into the story, again, to create that springboard, to create that challenge, to pass that baton to us, so that we continue ahead in this moment when so many people are suffering.
So there's a larger context to the story, of course, which has to do with the relationship of the state and religion. And, and this is a big story, day by day here in the United States that we're struggling with, right? How do we relate to religion and government? It's certainly a big deal in our current administration. Talk for a minute about what the arrangements are like in Pakistan, in terms of religion and government. I think you mentioned earlier that the Shia Muslim were also a minority. So I'm guessing that Pakistan is a dominant Sunni country.
Correct. Has about 250 million people, overwhelmingly Muslim, about 90 to 95%. But within that Islamic majority, there's incredible diversity. Within the majority denomination of Sunni Islam, there are different sub-denominations that compete for adherence and political influence. About 20% of the overall population, or so about 30% of the Muslim population, is Shia, which also aligns with an ethnic minority called the Hazara, and they face incredible levels of discrimination and also targeting by ISIS and other terrorists because they're the wrong kind of Muslim. And then with the remaining 5-7% of non-Muslims. You have a Christian community, a Hindu community, a Sikh community. There's also a breakaway Muslim denomination called the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. They've been deemed as heretics by the Muslim majority, and they're persecuted. So there's all these competing religious groups all fighting for just to make it through the day because it's an impoverished country, but also competing to have their community elevated often to the detriment of others. And this plays out in how the Pakistani constitution is designed. Only the senior leaders have to be Sunni Muslim, the Supreme Court justice, the president, and whatnot. This blasphemy law, like I mentioned, victimizes so many. And there's a creeping Islamization of the school curriculum, of other laws that, again, is pulling Pakistan away from what was a pretty, not a secular founding, but an open-minded founding. The founder of the country, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, in 1947, he talked about that Pakistan should be a place where anyone can pray, because Pakistan was reacting out of concern about being subsumed into Hindu majority India. So that's why Pakistan broke away. And they put, if you know the Pakistani flag, it's green with the star and crescent, but it has a white bar on the side. And that was placed there to signify the importance of religious minorities in the founding of the country. But all of this is under incredible pressure as these reactionary extremist forces continue to try to use the law to advance their religious agenda. And the moderate middle continues to shrink and shrink and shrink.
So, Matt, you mentioned earlier that you wanted this graphic novel not just to be a story, not just to memorialize a life, but also to spark action. And what Knox has just described, I mean, this is pretty heavy stuff. And it's also something that is far removed from the experience of most people in Western democracies that are going to be reading this novel. So how did you go about framing that idea of you can engage with this, you can take some meaningful action?
Yeah, I think in a couple of ways. First was showing the full span of Shahbaz's advocacy across his life. You know, he was already figuring out his purpose in life, even as young as 13 years old at a Good Friday service. And so seeing his ability to see the unseen, the destitute, the poor, it started so early. So that's number one that we can begin to recognize in ourselves is who are these people where we live? I would say that's the first thing. The second thing was showing some of the other elements of what he was able to accomplish that was beyond just himself, not just the advocacy, but for instance, when his brother and family moved to Canada long ago and then set up International Christian Voice. And so showing his kids already being part of the process, for instance, of getting persecuted Pakistanis out of Pakistan and getting them into Canada. So you see the kids, again, as the narrators, David and Natasha, their involvement, or at least their family's involvement, but now in a Western country with access to the press and their ability to shine a spotlight on some of these people. And that plays a little bit in the story. The most important thing, though, was where Knox himself, he took over the pen on the last words, which was to pose the question, and will you join us? And it's to get you thinking about, well, what is my role and how can I, and who are the people that I am called to share with or to see and to advocate for, and then what can I do? So I really was grateful the way that Knox kind of took the turn at the end to make it clear. We even have a conversation after Shahbaz has passed. We have a conversation between David and Natasha, reflecting not only on their life and the uncle they've just lost, but on the futures that they're going to pursue. And so you see that a little bit play out.
Well, let's develop that a little bit, Knox, because, this is fresh for me. We had committee meetings last week, and one of our church administrators, president of the conference in Hawaii, asked us to do a program over there, but wanted to be sure that we had at least one session focused on what can people do? What can rank and file church members or pastors do to advance religious freedom? And that's, it's easy to talk about religious freedom, the history, the principles. I'm a lawyer, the legal stuff, that's second nature, right? But giving people tools to actually say, okay, this is something I can do, that's much more challenging.
Yeah. There are definitely actions that members of your church and other churches can take. First, just recognizing we're blessed to live in the United States of America in the 21st century. And the blessings of liberty and prosperity that have been bestowed upon our country give us the opportunity to be a force for good in the world. And so how do we make sure our congressmen, our senators know that we care about this, that we expect them to care about this if they want our vote, and to, working with your advocacy arm and others, give them opportunities to reach out. And I'll be, in a couple of weeks, taking up the reins of a new Center for Global Religious Freedom. That's an initiative of Dallas Baptist University. We'll have an office here in DC and an office in Texas. And our mission is going to be to work to inspire students, churches, and policymakers to advance religious freedom for all. So we're going to be trying to create these on-ramps for people wherever they are in this sort of journey of wanting to advocate for religious freedom, to give them opportunities to engage. So top level, write your congressman, write your senator. We can't forget to do that. But at the same time, it's just praying for them, being mindful of the suffering world for Christians, but also for others. And then asking God to give us the eyes to see the opportunities that are before us. I had one very simple exchange when I was in Walmart in Northern Virginia at the checkout line. And the woman at the register, based on her name and facial features, I felt pretty certain she was from the Uyghur Muslim community, which is experiencing a genocide at the hands of the Chinese Communist Party. And I felt called just to sort of ask. I said, "Excuse me, are you a Uyghur?" And she goes, "Yes, I am." She looked a little surprised. And I said, I know it's really hard in China. I hope your family's okay. And she thanked me. And that was the end of the exchange. And nothing else came of it from my side. But it did seem like I gave this person a cool cup of water on a hot day. And it didn't take much. It just took me being aware of my surroundings. And since America is so diverse, people often have fled something or have family members who are suffering something. And so just being aware of that is a first step we can all take. And then God will lead us into greater ways to engage.
I've had some of those opportunities with Uber drivers when I'm in DC, because you have so many from so many different countries.
So, as we finish up here, I want you to talk a little about the potential demographic that this graphic novel is going to reach, because this is what excites me. Because Alan and I, we talk to folk, let's be frank, they're probably north of 40, would you say, Alan?
Boomers.
They're young. They're young.
And that's the group that's more receptive to the type of message that we're sharing about religious freedom. But this really has the potential to draw in a whole new generation of religious liberty advocates. So talk a little about that and your hopes for what this graphic novel can achieve.
Well, Matt, why don't you answer first? And I should just plug, Matt continues to write other comic books, so you should Google his name to see about the great stuff he's creating. But Matt's the pro in this space. I'll let Matt answer first.
Yeah, I'll start, and then Knox, you pick up after that. But for sure, this has become the medium of choice for a new generation. If you went into a Barnes and Noble 10 years ago, you would see a small section of the bookstore that was devoted to comics and graphic novels. But now it is expanded and expanded and expanded. I mean, they can't figure out what other sections are they going to sacrifice to add more comics, because this current generation, which, believe it or not, is beginning to shift away from digital reading. They want physical media. They are gravitating to this. It turns reluctant readers into readers. So that's one of the biggest things, is recognizing that generationally, this isn't just, Alan, to your point earlier, it's not just narrowly defined within the role of superheroes. Marvel and DC Comics have that cornered. But all these other companies, these many, many independent both comic book publishers and mainstream book publishers are realizing that comics are really just feeding and feeding and feeding a whole generation on every topic, fiction, nonfiction, and then within nonfiction, everything, biography, history, science, you name it. And so it's definitely expanded, the ability to reach a different generation. But Knox, I know you've got some thoughts on this too, personally.
Well, I've got two boys. One's a freshman at college. Another one's a junior in high school. I write stuff all the time. They never read anything I write about religious stuff. But when I posted on Instagram the picture of the graphic novel, they both messaged me saying, "Can I get a copy?" And for that very small sample size of a survey, that was like, yes, this is why we wanted to create this book, to create this on-ramp, an easy way, a way that meets young people where they are, with this gripping true story of sacrifice and faithfulness, and to hopefully start their journey and thinking, okay, how can I devote my time and energies towards these good things? And what does this mean to be a Christian in America or in the West, where we enjoy all these liberties when the world elsewhere is suffering so much? So I'm really excited about the potential for it. And I hope your listeners will pick up a copy and tell their friends and family about it. It's really a powerful, powerful book. And I'm really excited about what really, through God's providence, bringing this team together and being able to honor my friend Shahbaz with this wonderful, wonderful book.
Knox, if I could, one last thing to that is graphic novels at the end of the day, they're novels. So whether you're listening through Audible or audio, a novel or a story, whether you're reading it through prose, or now whether you're reading it graphically, it's bringing a story to life. If you can't go to Pakistan, we bring Pakistan to you, just like any other form of storytelling.
Thank you so much, Knox and Matt. And I will second that recommendation. Go to Amazon, check out the book Blood and Water, and get a copy, especially for the young person or people in your life.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Well, Bettina, I've known about the story of Shahbaz Bhatti for all of these years, but hearing it and hearing about a graphic novel, that was fantastic.
It really, really was. I mean, what a creative way to tell the story. I mean, it's thinking outside the box. I first heard about the story of Shahbaz the very year that he was assassinated. Knox was a speaker at an annual religious liberty dinner that we hold in Washington, D.C., and I just remember distinctly the hush that fell over the room as Knox told this story of this courageous man who had just been assassinated for standing up for the rights of minorities. I mean, we talk about religious liberty a lot, and often it's within the context of domestic public policy issues. I think it's good to have this reminder that religious liberty in other contexts is about life and death.
Well, we didn't really go there in the interview, but I think it's very helpful for Americans to see the dangers of an overbearing religious dominance within a country, right? For those who advocate that America should be a vigorously Christian nation, I think it's a be careful what you wish for scenario.
Absolutely. I mean, this is an example of a country that grounds its identity within a dominant religious tradition. And do we like how that is manifested in Pakistan? No, we don't. Let that be a cautionary tale for us in America.
Well, and this may seem like a bit of a stretch to go here, but, as the French Revolution got really violent, the ones who instigated, the oppression, well, it turned on them. They wound up, falling into the ditch that they had dug for others. And isn't that so often the case? You think that if you get power, as a religious movement, that somehow that power is not going to be turned on you at some point.
Right.
That's really silly.
It is, I mean, it is incredible, but it seems that we all have that same blind spot. We think that when we are part of a majority, when we can set the rules for everyone else, that we will always be part of that majority. But you just have to look back at the political historical record to realize just how ridiculous that assumption is. And yet every time, I mean, here in America, you see successive governments come in and feel the fact that they have this power to set rules and perhaps even to subvert norms that have been protective in the past. Well, guess what? At some point in the future, they will be inevitably part of a minority, and the rules that they have set may be used to them.
Well, look, we've been advocating against the expansion of presidential authority. This administration has continued an expansion that has been growing over many presidential administrations.
Yes.
But those who are so happy with the use and expansion of authority today are not going to be so happy when there's a change. And when a Democratic administration then uses the same authority in ways that the current majority is unhappy with.
Yeah.
It just I think I guess if I were going to sum this up, Bettina, I would say that the best way for America to actually be Christian is to practice the golden rule, is to remember that, do unto others as you would have others do unto you. Protect everybody's rights and freedoms, right? And then it doesn't matter if you're in the majority or in the minority. Your rights will be protected as well. And that's the ethos of our Seventh-day Adventist religious liberty work is, we work to protect religious freedom for all.
Absolutely. And that is the perfect note to end our conversation today. Alan, we've kind of strayed from the topic of the interview, but I think it is the larger truth that undergirds so much of what we do on this podcast. And with
but I think it's what Shahbaz Bhatti stood for.
True.
Was, protecting the rights of the minorities. And it's what he gave his life for.
Absolutely. So thank you, everyone, for joining the conversation today. I'm Bettina Krause, and I'm with Alan Reinach. Until next time, please remember, vigilance is the price of liberty.
Eternal vigilance, even.
Eternal, let us not forget.